Welcome to Reading the Gospels Together for Wednesday, August the 26th. And today we're reading Acts chapter 17, which continues with Paul's adventures in Greece. Now, you might remember that the mission team, which included our friend Luke, as well as Paul, Silas, and their new companion Timothy, were in Philippi, where they established at least one congregation centered at Lydia's home. When Paul and Silas are asked to leave the city as they'd caused unrest, inevitably, it seems as though Luke remained behind to help the new congregation out, because as soon as they leave, Luke once again talks in terms of they, Paul and Silas being they, rather than we. So for Paul and Silas, it's off to Thessalonica, a Macedonian harbor city, prominent both then and now. Beautiful boardwalk. The team stays for at least 3 weeks, during which time Paul is once again teaching in the synagogue, proclaiming Jesus as the Christ who suffered, died, and was resurrected. Luke describes the result. He says, "Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and quite a few prominent women." Now, a couple of things to notice. Paul's often having greater success among the Gentile or the non-Jewish segment of the population, and Luke uses the phrase, quite a few prominent women. It's a popular misconception that Paul was anti-woman. Many of his ministry successes centered around quite a few popular women, such as Lydia in our previous chapter and Priscilla in our next. A quick reading of Romans chapter 16 with a long list of women colleagues in ministry bears this out. Now, prominent women were power brokers in the ancient world, as they are in today's world and in today's church. Getting these groups on side was important, as they wielded influence in their households and in their social community. Now, in this chapter, Luke mentions inroads among them twice, both in Thessalonica and in Berea, as well as a well-known woman in Athens. Luke is careful in all of his descriptions of the early church to mention both men and women together. Now, not all influential women were on side, however. Back in chapter 13 in Pisidian Antioch, the opponents of the message rallied support amongst both the women of high standing and leading men of the city. Notice the women come first. Combine this with the prominent role of women in the Gospels, people such as Mary Magdalene, and the lazy but oft-repeated charge of the New Testament being misogynistic, it just doesn't hold water. There's much more to be said on this, but not in 8 minutes. Well, back to our story. After 3 weeks in Thessalonica, Paul is meeting with more success than his opponents could tolerate. Luke tells us they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace, formed a mob, and started a riot. You can just picture it in some of these bad characters too. They stormed the house of a convert, Jason, where Paul and Silas were reputed to be staying, but finding them gone, they content themselves with dragging Jason and some other converts before the city officials. And the charge against them is both interesting and familiar. They are defying Caesar's decrees, saying there's another king, the one called Jesus. In other words, Christianity is treason, as it does not grant ultimate authority to Caesar, but to Jesus. Once again, it worked with Pilate against Jesus, and Paul and Silas are forced to flee, this time to Berea. And there's a wonderful monument in Berea, which is spelled Varia these days with a V rather than a B, although pronounced the same. It's a wonderful monument there marking this moment in mosaic. And you'll understand why the modern Varians love this monument when you hear the verse written both in the Bible and inscribed on the monument. It says, "Now the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true." Now, I visited this beautiful monument, which shows a number of ancient Bereans listening closely to Paul while checking carefully their Bible scrolls. I've also visited the synagogue there, which serves the very tiny Jewish community. Now, sadly, most of that Jewish community perished in the Holocaust, as did almost 90% of Greek Jews. Around 75,000 of a total Jewish population of maybe 85,000 perished in the Holocaust, many being put on trains and transported to Auschwitz for extermination. That makes this a sobering visit. to that little synagogue, but it's also a testament to the tenacity of those who survive. As a result of Paul's ministry, we read, many of them believed, as did also a number of prominent Greek women, there they are again, and many Greek men, maybe not so prominent. But those who chased the team from Thessalonica to Berea come to hear of the success, and so those people who are not fans of Paul come to Berea, making sufficient trouble that Paul is again forced to flee, this time on his own. He seems to be the focus of everyone's unhappiness. And Silas and Timothy remain behind to help the community get on its feet, as Luke has done in Philippi. This time, Paul puts some real distance between himself and trouble, looking for a fresh start and traveling all the way down to Athens, a solid 400 kilometers on foot. But it's very possible that Paul went by boat down along the coast. It says they took him to the coast. Now, the main road is there, but also, of course, the port. Luke usually mentions a sea journey when one occurs, but we don't know for sure. Either way, Paul's instructions were for Silas and Timothy to join him ASAP. In the end, quite a bit of time eventually elapses by the time they get there. Luke, again, isn't clear how much, but it seems like several months anyway. So the chapter closes with Paul in Athens, and Paul, despite getting around in the world, was still a devout Jew at heart, and Athens, as a capital of Greek pagan worship and philosophy, was a shock to Paul's system. There were idols everywhere, including, of course, the major temples and shrines on the Acropolis, visible in ruined but majestic state to this day, highlighted, of course, by the Parthenon itself. Now here, Paul takes on a two-pronged approach, speaking in synagogues, but also speaking daily in the marketplaces, the agora. Philosophical and religious disputes were national pastimes in Greece, and particularly in Athens. In case we didn't know this, Luke points out, all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. This is before YouTube and Twitter and the rest. Paul has run-ins with both Epicurean and Stoic philosophers right off, who dismiss him as a babbler, spouting nonsense about some odd, new, foreign god. Ultimately, Paul is brought to a meeting of the Areopagus, a sort of city council located on Mars Hill, which has a stunning view of the Acropolis. And Paul preaches to them in a sermon partly preserved by Luke, beginning with a great line. Paul starts this way. He says, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious, for as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So, you're ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." And he does, with ending his sermon with a tantalizing hint about the resurrection. Now, this sparks interest in many. Others, we are told, just sneered. And ultimately, Paul wins followers, among them a member of the Areopagus with the classic Greek name of Dionysius, as well as a woman named Damaris, who must have been prominent in the faith community to have her name preserved in this way. So what's noteworthy about Paul's speech, and a lesson to be taken to heart, is that Paul does not begin by saying, "You Athenians are stupid and everything you believe is wrong," even though he does think that everything they believe is wrong. He uses their beliefs as a stepping stone to present the truth of the gospel. Now that's a lesson for us all as we interact with other people of other faiths or no faiths. In essence, Paul is saying, what you believe is pointing toward the truth. It's not the truth itself, but it's pointing there, and that truth is fully revealed in Jesus. Amen, Paul. We'll see how Paul's ministry there continues tomorrow.